Welcome back to the Gen 20 podcast. I'm Nicole.
And I'm Marina.
And today we're joined by Bethany Adkins, a former pediatric nurse turned purpose encourager and host of the Millennial Mission Podcast. Thank you so much for being here today, Bethany. Can you tell us a little bit more about your work and your mission?
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me. So excited to be here. So my name's Bethany Adkins. I currently live in Ohio with my husband, our 2 kids. We have one on the way, and my husband and I host a podcast together called the Millennial Mission Podcast. And the whole gist of the podcast is, we cover a couple different things. We talk about purpose, one, because that's something I struggled with for a really long time. So I'm super passionate about just diving into what it really means to live out your purpose. And then the other portion is obviously we're speaking mainly to millennials. And through sharing other people's stories about their purpose journeys and all of that, we're kind of encouraging millennials to rise up and suck it up and be the people that they're supposed to be.
Yeah, we love that. It's so aligned with our mission too.
Mm-hmm. And it's so important. I feel like just the other day we were watching something on YouTube and it was marketed to millennials. And I was like, I don't know that I trust her because she's a millennial. And I was like, I'm a millennial. This is not good. But that term has taken on its own stigma.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So Bethany, can you tell us how you got started with the purpose route that you've taken?
Yeah, I feel like a lot of times what we end up doing with our lives comes from our struggles, which I know you guys feel the same way because I was listening to your failure episode, which was super good and totally relatable. So, but yeah, I feel like I talk a lot about purpose. I've learned a lot about purpose and just kind of dove in headfirst to what that means because for so long, I didn't know what my purpose was. I felt mediocre at everything. I had no idea what I wanted to be. I liked things, but I wasn't really good at anything, just kind of average. And I feel like culture and society and school, they give us this idea that we have to have this one big thing, something that we're good at. When we get a career, that's what we're going to do for the rest of our lives. That kind of defines who we are. And so then as consumers of that ideal, we think, okay, well, that thing, whatever I choose, that's going to be my purpose. That's going to be what I do for the rest of my life. And because of that, I feel like a lot of us are like, okay, well, I just don't have a purpose. I don't even know what I'm going to do. And that's kind of where I was for a long time. So I like to say there's this invisible checklist that we have in America where you go to school, graduate high school, go to college, get a degree, work that job, get a house, married, the American dream, right? And not everybody is really created to live that path. And I think that so many of us try to follow it and we aren't all called to walk that journey. So I think that's where the main issue with purpose comes in. And I could dive way deeper into that, but I'm sure you guys have more specific questions. So,
yeah, I think purpose is kind of almost a buzzword these days. I, preparing for my upcoming maternity leave, I was going back through blog post drafts that I've written over the years and just haven't published yet. And one was from 2017, and I started it with talking about how I saw 3 posts on Pinterest, just in my top home feed that were what is your purpose? And that was even years ago.
Yeah.
And it's why are people so obsessed with purpose, do you think? And how can we actually integrate that into our lives?
That's a really good question. It's definitely a buzzword. It's becoming more and more popular. And I think that's because people are growing more and more discontent with their lives. And so I think that the more that happens, people are searching, what is my purpose? What am I here for? And it's because we have this misconception of what purpose actually is. And so I think that we look at purpose like it's this destination. When in reality, purpose is a journey. I always say, if you are alive today, whether you're working at a gas station, whether you're a waitress at a restaurant, whether you're home with your kids, you have a purpose, and what you're doing today is part of your purpose. And so we get so caught up in like looking for that next big thing, that oftentimes we overlook the fact that what we're doing today is part of our purpose, and who we are today is part of our purpose. And so I think that with adding in social media and follower numbers and all of these stats and comparison and highlight reels, it makes us even more discontent. And instead of looking inward to who we're supposed to be, what we're supposed to do, and what we're doing in this moment, we look outward at what everybody else is doing. And it's just like this vicious cycle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I feel like, too, somewhere along the way, we tied purpose to our jobs and careers. And
Yes.
Americans are already so career obsessed and build their identity around what their jobs are, that it was this feeling of like, well, my job, my career has to be my purpose in life. And if I don't like it, like if I'm working a 9-to-5 that I don't like, that means I'm not fulfilling my purpose and I'm failing. My purpose and my career
are two different
things, and they overlap often, which is fun.
Yeah.
But they're separate.
Yeah, that is completely okay. So like if somebody asked me, all right, what would you say you've learned about purpose? That's one of the very first things that I say. I always say the purpose isn't a destination, it's a journey. It's every day, that's part of our purpose. But the second thing is purpose does not equal career. It's crazy to me that we are raised up in America to go to school and then go to college and look at this list and pick a career that we're supposed to do for the next 40 to 50 years, and then, or 30 to 40 or whatever it is. I just was like, I'm not doing that path, so I don't even know anymore. And then we're like, well, this is my purpose for my whole life. But that's not true. You have to have a job because you have to have provision, especially if you have kids, you need to provide for your family. You have to have a means to an end. But that doesn't always mean that that is your purpose. So I think that's such an important point that you brought up. If you're in a career and you don't love it, and that's not like what sets your soul on fire, that's okay. Sometimes your career pays for what your purpose is supposed to do. So, maybe your job provides for you to be able to go travel to Africa in the summers and like work in orphanages. Your purpose isn't always your job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel that reminds me of Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert, where she's talking about writing, I think specifically, and she says that you shouldn't always like let your purpose like provide for you, essentially. And I think that's a really important point too, because again, it doesn't need to be like tied up with your career and how you make money necessarily.
Yeah, and often when we do, like, we put this pressure on what our passions are, what our purpose is to provide for us, it becomes like super stressful, which is okay. Like, if your purpose is, if you're able to build a career out of your purpose, that's okay. But I think that we have it twisted that it absolutely has to provide. And it doesn't always. It can be like this passion project that we have. So I think that's a really good point.
Yeah. And I kind of want to hop back a second to what you said, like what you're doing every day is like mattering.
Yeah.
Mattering? Is that a word? Yeah, that sounds weird. For your purpose, because I think like with my business, like I feel like my business is very intertwined with purpose for me. And it's kind of, I don't know, like there are definitely times in my career where I'm like, is this really what I want to be doing? I don't know. But one thing I like tell myself is always like, well, what you're doing matters. And because like a lot of times it feels like it doesn't, right? Like every day, like whether it's your purpose or not, you're like, oh, none of this really matters.
Yeah.
So, like, how do you kind of deal with that and like tell people to deal with that?
Yeah, I think that so much of our everyday lives are pretty mundane for the most part. And we have come to believe that that's like not okay, and that the small little things that we can do throughout our days, like taking care of our kids or cooking a healthy dinner for our families or even opening the door for someone, that those are just insignificant because they're not worthy of like posting on Instagram. But in reality, those little interactions that we have with people, those are sometimes the things that make the biggest impact. And often if we're always like looking with our heads down or just so far forward, we're missing out on little opportunities. We're missing out on meeting somebody that crosses our path that might be leading us to the next part in our purpose journey. Corey, my husband, and I, we don't really call it purpose, but purpose journey, because it's about, yeah, today might be mundane. Today might suck. You might not have anything like worthy of social media today, but there are still opportunities in every day to look for that will lead you to the next. It's all stepping stones. It's a culmination of your whole life that leads you to the next season in your life. So one of the common threads, we always interview people who are stepping into their purpose, and that we love highlighting their journeys because everybody's journeys are different, but there's so many commonalities. And one of them is that the people who find what they're put on this earth to do, they took opportunities in every season. So for example, one of our good friends came on, and she's a fitness instructor, and she has a business and coaches people, and she's like super athletic, way more than I could ever be. But at one point in her life, she was a waitress. And she said, even in that season, even though I knew I wasn't going to do this forever, even though I didn't love being a waitress, I still took every opportunity, every interaction as an opportunity for me to learn and to make an impact on that old lady who was lonely. And those lessons that I took in waitressing, I could carry them on to my coaching business for customer service. So it's all about a journey. It's about living every day to be the best you and seeing what can I look for in today to be the best me.
I love that. And I relate to that. I try to do that in my own life too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think kind of like finding your purpose as a buzzword, like not so much your purpose journey as you describe it, but like more of a true purpose, is like, it's kind of like we're sort of forced to follow these like cultural norms, right? And like a lot of times doing like what you're meant to do and what you feel like you're meant to do is like going against the grain in a way. So how do we deal with that as millennials?
Ugh, this is another really good question. Yeah, that's such a good question. And this is also a huge part of my story because I went to school, I became a nurse. Everybody was so proud of me for getting my bachelor's degree, and I had a good job with great benefits. And then I was like, this is not, like, I just did this to please everyone. I did this because this was the next right thing, and this isn't what I was supposed to do, and I'm miserable. I'm good at nursing. I like taking care of people, but this is not sitting well with me. So that's a problem for millennials because millennials job hop. And so easily we get stigmatized. And there is truth to that. I mean, I definitely think that millennials job hop and they want like instant gratification. But this was not that. Like I was put on the earth to do not this. So anyway, I ended up leaving, and people just like so much opposition, so much pushback. They were like, oh, are you sure? Are you sure you want to leave and just go home and be home with your kids? And like that wasn't valued enough. So I think that when we have that pushback, it's really important to be sure of ourselves, because when you go against the grain, anytime you go against the grain, you're going to get pushback. And almost always when you're stepping into your purpose, it makes other people who aren't doing the same thing around you super uncomfortable. And so and oftentimes that's the people that are closest to you. And so those are the people that are really going to give you pushback. So you just really have to be sure and like kind of shut out the naysayers. Make sure you're not doing this to please other people. Make sure you're not doing this to look cool, but this is like actually what I'm supposed to do. And when you are actually, I feel like I'm not making sense, but when you're actually stepping into that purpose, it's easier to ignore what other people are saying. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like there are times in my life where I've been like, oh, I think I'm going to do this. And then sometimes that criticism, that constructive criticism, I'm like, yeah, maybe they're right. You have to be willing to take the criticism. But if you're stepping into your purpose, it's different. It's like no matter how many times you quit it, no matter how many times people tell you it's irrational or it doesn't make sense, you can't give it up. And so that's what I would say about that.
Yeah, Marina's kind of having a bit of that on her career path.
Oh my gosh, it's so relatable, everything you said. I did that. I did the pursuing a 9-to-5 in the corporate world, trying to do what I thought was right. And I even I went back to grad school, and I even got a job in publishing, but still 9-to-5. And I was talking to my friend about this last night because I was working in publishing. It was my dream job, and I was still so miserable.
Yeah.
It was because it's the structure, the structure wasn't right for me. And when I finally just told my family, I lost my job because of COVID, and I told my family, I'm not going to find a new job. I'm not going to look for one. I'm going to write my novel, and I'm going to build a business. And I think they were tired of me for the last 5 years, trying desperately to find my way, that they were like, okay. And even my mom, who's I love her to pieces, but she's a worrier, and she's like, well, I don't know. And it's like, well, I'm going to do it, because if I don't try it now, I'm always going to wonder. And it's not going to be easy, but you know what? It wasn't easy to go to the office every day and not slam my head against the desk. So
absolutely.
But something you were saying about purpose made me think, can we eradicate the word just? Because I feel like so often when people are starting to find their purpose and starting on their purpose journey, they think, oh, well, I'm going to leave my job and I'm just going to stay home with my kids, or I'm just going to write a novel while I figure this out. And it's like, no, that's hard. It's hard to pursue that. And you're working at it, and if you look at the small scale, teaching your son to be a kind human, or working on building a story, that's important. That matters. You're learning to communicate. You're learning to give back. And so I feel like so often we just, there's that word again. We diminish our worth and our worthiness and our actions because of what the bigger societal expectations are, and that they don't matter. At the end of the day, other people's thoughts of you, they don't matter.
Right. Because nobody else is paying your bills. Nobody else is living your life, and nobody else has to answer to that restlessness that you're feeling inside. I love that you said, let's just eradicate the word just, because I think that that's another reason people they don't step into their purpose. But think about all the stay-at-home moms that feel so inadequate, because I felt like that when I left nursing and I went home. People would always, when I was a nurse, give me these googly eyes, oh, you're a pediatric nurse in a burn unit. Thank you so much for what you do. And then flip that to me being home, and people would be like, oh, so are you ever going to go back to work? And I'm like, are you kidding me? I'm raising the next generation right now. What I do here in my home is so important, because when I leave this earth, these kids are still going to be here. And so I have the opportunity to invest in them and raise them up. It's not just a stay-at-home mom. That's one of the most important careers that people can have.
Yeah, you're the CEO of your house.
Exactly. Yes. It's such a cool, empowering job. Just because it doesn't bring money, which we talked about earlier, it's still so significant.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, my family is super supportive, but I think at first they were just afraid because I was going against the norm and doing something unknown. And
which I think is interesting, because your dad has his own business.
Yeah, but he's an engineer, and he built his own business servicing power plants. So it's still more traditional. And so in my mind, I thought, oh, well, he's an engineer and I'm just writing.
Yeah. Well, same thing with me. I loved writing, but even when I was young, I loved writing, but I always said, well, that's not going to provide for my family. So I can't do that. I'll always have to do that on a side. That can't be a real career. Which is totally not true.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking about this. This can even just be a side note about how the patriarchy, I'm always down with the patriarchy, how it's hurt us, because with the, I'm just a stay-at-home mom. Imagine if instead of saying, oh, I'm a stay-at-home mom, you say, oh, I'm a co-founder of this family and the CEO. And if we spun it so that it wasn't such a like female role, but just I'm running this household, I'm building this empire, and the empire happens to be my family, my children, and the good we're doing. And I think
and that's so important, because if your home is a mess, there's no way that your kids can function as humans. There's no way that your husband can function as a human, and there's no way that we can go out into the world and contribute in any positive way.
Yeah. And I mean, caring for kids is like a very highly skilled endeavor, because that's why daycare charge so much money.
Yeah, seriously, that's so true.
Obviously,
it's no joke. No. I've been here for 4 days, and I'm just thinking like, oh my God, I would never make it as a teacher.
Oh, I know.
I'm not smart enough.
Yeah, I have 4 sisters, and I'm one of the 2 that have kids, and I think that the rest of them probably don't have kids because they're aunts to my kids. So
it's parenting is interesting. How old are your kids?
8 and 5. Yeah, so they're a little bit.
My son is 2, and he's in a very boundary pushing phase. Like yesterday, he climbed to the top of a ladder.
Oh my God!
And rescued him from that. And then he pushed a bench over to the kitchen counter, and he was trying to climb up on the counter, and I was like putting him down. I was trying to lay the bench on the floor, and he like pushed it down on his toe, and like a bunch of skin came off his toe, and I was like, I cannot deal with this.
Oh my gosh!
And he's crying, and I'm just like, how do we get here? How?
That sounds like my son. He's strong-willed though, so he'll be a really good CEO one day, or like an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I keep telling. Well, he swallowed a drill bit last week. So
not a sharp one, like a
just like
a little Phillips shape.
Well, as long as it wasn't sharp.
Yeah. We took it to the emergency room, and they were like, "Oh, it's okay. It'll come out." We never found it, but so we went and got another X-ray, and they were like, "Oh, it's gone." And I was like, "Phew."
He's gonna end up being like an ER doc.
Yeah, I was gonna keep it and give it to him when he graduates med school.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny.
But now I'm just gonna buy another one and pretend it was the one.
Well, he'll never listen to this podcast episode.
He'll never know. But like, man, it's like they turn 2, and it's like explosions everywhere.
Yeah.
Nothing safe.
Oh, I did think of one thing I wanted to say about the parents. So I think that our parents, like their generation, it was so much about provision and providing for their family. And that was so important. And there's so many great things that we can learn from them. Like they worked so hard to provide for us and have solid 9-to-5 jobs. It was so important. But I think that that's what makes it so hard. The paradigm shift of, yes, they did that. And at that time it was so needed for us, for them to provide for us, really. But now times have changed. We have technology. There's so many different things that we can do that aren't brick and mortars. And it's really hard for them to wrap their minds around. And another thing is millennials are really service oriented, and they're really impact oriented. And they would rather, I know I would, and you guys can correct me if you feel differently, but I would rather make $30,000 and just be able to pay my bills and make sure my kids are fed, but be so at peace with where I'm working and what I'm doing in life that I'm happy and I'm a good present mom. I would rather do that than make $250,000 a year and be stressed out, not present with my family, unable to live my life, and unable to enjoy it. I would rather know I'm making an impact in a positive way than making a ton of money and just like a miserable person. And I think that that's a hard paradigm shift for people.
Yeah, that's fair.
And I feel like for so long, being content and happy wasn't an option. It was just you work.
Yeah.
And if you're working and miserable, you might as well make money anyway.
Right.
And we've shifted away from that.
Yeah.
Things are different. Job paths are different. Job growth is different. A lot of times millennials have found that in order to grow their career, grow a role, you have to leave the company anyway. And so that leads to job hopping, and that makes people question their purpose and question their paths. And
right.
I think it just is so different from our parents' and grandparents' generation.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, kind of jumping off from that, like 2 other things I wanted to talk about were like a growth mindset and your comfort zone, and like how that plays into like finding your purpose journey.
So I would say that growth mindset and comfort are complete opposites, because
Mm-hmm.
usually if you're comfortable, you're not growing, because growth is super uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing I want to say about that. But
Mm-hmm.
I think that we have to learn to lean into the discomfort, because it's in those moments of failure, it's in those moments of discomfort, it's in those moments where we learn and we grow, and it takes us into our next step of life. So if we're coming home every day and like, and this is totally okay to do every once in a while and hang out with your family, but if you're like vegging out every day and watching TV and just eating crap food, like you're not necessarily happy, but you're not necessarily uncomfortable. You're just kind of living life very passively. You're not growing, and you're not going to be able to move into the next stage of your life, because you're not looking out for the opportunities that are being presented to you every day.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas even if you just try and have a growth mindset slightly, like a little bit at a time, I'm going to read a little bit more. I'm going to get up earlier every day and drink some water, or meditate, or do a devotional. Then that is going to make you start feeling better and wanting to do more and continuing to grow. And then those small behaviors will help to propel you into those opportunities and that purpose that we keep talking about.
Yeah, I think that's like reminds me a little bit of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where it's like you need to take care of those like baseline needs before you can stack on top of them. And it's definitely like challenging, I think, especially like now with the pandemic, especially, but like with working just remotely and online and like more in this gig economy kind of thing, where not to tie work to purpose, but I mean, a lot of our days tend to be shaped around our work days,
Yeah.
And like those can be big points of stress for a lot of people, which might not leave a lot of time or energy to actually pursue what you feel like your purpose journey is.
Absolutely. And I do think it's so hard for so many of us right now. I would say most people feel the same way. Like there's so many days where I am like, man, I have a podcast recording and I have to talk about all these things that like I do and I want to do, but I'm not always doing them right now. And I think that's just because the way of the world right now. Does that make me a hypocrite? I don't think so. I think it makes me real and willing to be honest and say we're human, we're imperfect, we're not always going to get it right. But if we're just willing to try our best every day and give ourselves grace when we fail, but say, all right, maybe tomorrow will be better. Let me try a little bit more tomorrow. Then that is when we can continue to keep growing. But yeah, we're not going to get it right 100% of the time. And especially in these times where our kids are home and doing school and we're working and the internet's being sucked up in 50 different ways and everybody's like annoyed with each other, there's got to be grace there. So
yeah. Some days are about surviving and some days are about thriving.
Yes.
And they're not always the same day.
Love it.
They're never the same.
They're definitely never the same day.
Never.
But we need them both.
There's a time and place. So Bethany, what would your like best piece of advice be right now for a millennial trying to start their purpose journey or kind of pursuing their purpose?
Yeah. Oh man, there's like so many different things. I'll give a few quick, like tangible things that people can do. First, I would say you really need to be honest with yourself and check yourself. Are you living in a victim mindset? Because if as long as you're living in that victim mindset and saying like my life is this way because of X, Y, and Z, you can't control anything else that's going on in the world, but you can control yourself and your behaviors. So if you're living in that mindset, get out of it. It's just not serving anybody, and it's definitely not serving you. The next thing I would say is I love journaling. I know for guys that's probably, but I think you probably talk to mostly girls. Maybe. I don't know. Either way.
Yeah, my husband is actually a big journaler in our house.
Yeah.
I don't journal. My husband journals every day.
Yeah.
And my brother listens to this podcast. So hey Peter, journal.
Go journal.
Love it. Well, I just think there's so many things that our thoughts, once we get them out on paper, they make so much more sense. And so if you're like, I have no idea what I want to do with my life, I don't even know who I am or what I like, right at the top of the paper, who am I and what am I supposed to do? And just start writing things, write things about who you are. That was one of the very first things that I did when I was feeling super lost. And you might not get the answers right away, but if you do it even for 5 or 10 minutes a day, that will help so much. And then the last thing I would say is just wake up every day with the intention to be the best that you can be. There are going to be days that you fall short. And like we just said, you have to give yourself grace. But if you're looking out more than you're looking down at your phone, if you're just looking for opportunities instead of trying to hurry up through the difficult seasons, there's so much opportunity and there's so much to learn and there's so much growth to be had in those mundane days where you just have no sense of direction.
Yes, I love that. I completely agree.
That was great. And so a reminder to our listeners, Bethany and her husband have a podcast about the Millennial Mission. So everyone go listen to that. And I bet you'll find even more gems. And Bethany, where can people find you?
Yeah, so our podcast Instagram and our Instagram is kind of all combined. So it's just at Bethany and Corey. And Corey's name is spelled Corey. And that's mainly it. We don't do a ton of Facebook. We have one, but it's kind of boring. So Instagram, and then on our Instagram is the links to the podcast and our website and everything like that.
Awesome. And we'll link that in the show notes for everyone too.
Awesome.
All right, Nicole, you're going to sing us out?
Yes, I will. Okay. Thank you so much for listening to the Gen 20 podcast. We'd love if you leave us a rating and review, and we'll talk to you again soon. Bye.
Bye.